So our first speaker, I'd like to welcome Professor David Pearson, recently undergraduate dean at Hull York Medical School and still an active clinician. So David, welcome, and do tell us how we can get the best out of clinical placements.
Fantastic. Thank you. Can I just check the acoustics? I gather from what Henry said there, they're probably very good and too good. Are you okay at the back? You can hear okay. Excellent, thank you. I shall start my little stopwatch so I don't get into trouble from Erin. So thank you ever so much to Professor O'Halloran, to John, to Henry, and to Erin and colleagues. Anne and Mahindra and I have been given an extremely warm welcome, and it's lovely to be in Cork, and we've had a great time already, so I hope today goes well. I'm David Pearson, as Henry said, and I'm going to talk to you about making the most of clinical placements, if I can get my notes open. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about why I've got some authority to be here to talk to you today. I'm very much going to be looking at some of the practical stuff that John mentioned in terms of how you as students can get the most out of your placements, and how those of you who are tutors and faculty here can help your students get the most out of placements. I'm going to start with a little bit of background and educational theory to put this in context, concentrate a bit on you guys as students and then on the tutors, and then really bring it back so that you've got a little bit of time to think about what you can do differently after today, after this session, after the workshops, to get more out of your placements. I'll reference in ePrePP, which is an incredibly important project and helps some of capturing that clinical learning and making the most out of it. But mainly this is about thinking about your placements and why they're valuable and how we can maximize their potential. So apologies for the big, slightly stressed-looking me in my job. I just wanted to say I've been teaching undergraduates, postgraduates, organising placements, helping accredit placements and do some research for about 20 years. So I've got a little bit of authority, I guess, to be here, and a bit of experience, which I hope to share. I've also done some research into clinical placements. And as John kindly mentioned, I've just had a book published on how to make the most of community placements, which sadly I haven't got any copies to sell, otherwise I would, because I'm shameless. But and more importantly, I support Sheffield Wednesday, and I'm a dad, and I keep bees, because actually the other stuff doesn't matter as much, does it? And this is an interesting map for various reasons. One of which it tells you where Yorkshire and the Humber is, and on the sort of little insert map on the right, I'm based at Hull York Medical School, which is one of the newer medical schools in the UK, which is shared, as the name implies, between the Universities of Hull and the University of York, but covers broadly the area highlighted to the east and north of Yorkshire, about 1.4 million people in the population there. And my GP practice, because I'm a GP, is the little nose that sticks out of Yorkshire. Halfway down on the right-hand map is the little place called Bridlington, which is an old seaside resort, somewhat faded in its grandeur now. That's where I practice, and I live somewhere in the middle of that. Now, clearly, the interesting thing about this map is that Ireland is both united in this map and it's absent completely and independent from the UK, so I won't do any more politics at all, but so I apologise that it's a bit that you're missed off, but maybe you're delighted. So I consider myself a fortunate man. I'm just going to say a little bit about general practice, really, because that is my clinical context for giving this talk. The actual book, A Fortunate Man, is the story of a country doctor that was written in the 60s, by John Berger, and he reflected and followed a country GP around and showed him and how he interacted with his patients. And I consider myself fortunate. It's very busy and stressful, as some of my other GP colleagues in the room will attest to. But equally, both ourselves as GPs and other medical colleagues and nursing colleagues, we're very lucky because we have intimate access to patients' lives, we help care for people, we help make a difference. It's extremely worthwhile. So even though it is stressful and busy and stuff needs doing to make to attract more people into those professions, it is a privilege. It's a double privilege, whether you're a nurse, a pharmacist, or a GP, or other medical colleague, to be involved with teaching as well, because that is equally rewarding. So much as occasionally we whinge at you guys as students and some of the marking stuff, we love it really. So don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Let me just say why we're here in terms of background and context. We're short of clinicians in Ireland, as we are in the UK and a lot of the world. And I mean clinicians in the broadest sense, everyone involved in health professions. And particularly in the most deprived and difficult areas to work in, we're doubly short of clinicians. So in terms of professions in medicine, mental health, GP, some of the nursing and pharmacy professions, but especially in the poorest communities. And in order to attract people to work in those most difficult areas, we have to have placements in those difficult areas, and we have to impress upon you how rewarding and valuable it can be to serve in those areas. We recently had a Dutch medical student over from Maastricht working in Hull, and she was an outstanding student, and she used to be extremely keen and go in every morning to the hospitals and come up and see us in general practice and volunteer this left, right and centre. What struck her about our students in HIMSS is that the nearer they got to exams, the more they didn't go into the hospital or to GP onto their placements, the more they retreated to the library or to practicing exam techniques with their friends. And the point of that is that she was shocked because she felt learning medicine was about learning from patients. And what I hope to impress upon you a little bit today is that I would agree with her fully, and that there's something wrong with our system and our assessments if we're not rewarding learning directly from patients. But equally, we have to make sure the placements are very valuable so that you do feel that actually going to see real people in real clinical settings is better than practicing with your friends in the privacy of your own room. So I'll talk a little bit about that. I'm starting with some educational theory, though. I don't know if you cover this much in your pharmacy, nursing, or medicine courses. Some of you might, and some of you might sort of get the bug and want to learn more. So I'm going to look at adult learning, reflective learning, social learning, learning environments, and then I'm hoping to bring that back to the specific practical top tips of how to get the most out of placements. What I want to do first, though, is just get you to do a bit of work and a bit of thinking. So this is not about medicine or pharmacy or nursing. Just have a chat with your neighbour for 2 minutes about what the most memorable learning experience you've had is. What's the thing? It could be anything from windsurfing to learning the piano or anything. What's memorable learning experience, and why was it memorable? Just have a quick natter to your neighbour. Okay. Thank you. We don't have AIDS, obviously, but I'm sorry, I should just say, those of you who are in Health Campus or on your mobile devices, please, I wasn't trying to ignore you then. I hope you were chatting to whoever was with you in those settings as well, and welcome. Just a couple of people shout out thoughts. What made your learning experience memorable? Anyone want to just shout out what it was? Not specifically the experience, but why was it memorable? People?
Challenging.
So challenge, support.
Or being immersed in the learning experience.
Being immersed in the learning experience. Any other thoughts? Okay. So various things. I mean, usually things are memorable and make a big difference if there's something you want to learn. So there's a drive to do it, something you understood you had to know, but absolutely what you said about the people you're with. So being taught with passion, being taught with skill and clarity, and something absolutely you are actively involved with the learning. So if you're sitting in the corner listening, occasionally it's really amazing, but often you switch off. So you need to be immersed in the learning experience. And let's see if that chimes with some of the theory. So there was a guy that most of you won't know about called John Dewey, who was the sort of pioneering educationalist from the US from, gosh, about 100 years ago. Henry will remember him. And he very much talked about active engagement and doing as the sort of the bedrock of how we learn. And the other person who we come across a lot in medicine is William Osler, who was a Canadian physician of about the same ilk and era, slightly further back. What Osler said, and this is just as relevant to nursing or pharmacy, he who studies medicine without books sails an uncharted sea. But he who studies medicine without patients does not go to sea at all. And what I hope to impress on you is that education needs to be based on authentic experiences, and they're most powerful when you've made an emotional attachment or a bond or really got involved with a meaningful interaction on your placement. And I'm not saying that to diss e-learning, far from it today, or learning from books, or learning from simulated patients. It's just that all those things need to be part of a package, and the patient and the clinical encounter on your placement needs to be at the heart of that package. Otherwise, you lose the richness that makes you really listen and change and develop. Dewey also believed in a higher or moral purpose for education as a tool for change, and that maybe sounds a bit old-fashioned and altruistic 100 years on, but all the good universities and the great medical schools, including this one, we are here not just to graduate students, but to make a difference in the communities that we serve, and that's really important, and that's basically what Dewey was saying all that time ago. So what does active learning or participatory learning involve? It's doing, not observing. It's being hands-on and not just watching. It's doing in a meaningful, relevant clinical context, and really making that context relevant needs good teachers and good tutors and good support. And it also needs you as students to be prepared to get stuck in. I'll come back to social learning. David Kolb, who was a US educator in the 80s, talked about experiential learning, and some of you will have heard of Kolb's learning cycle. So what Kolb said was that we learn by experiencing something, by reflecting on it, by conceptualizing it, and then by experimenting in order to go around the loop and do things better the second time. So if you have an encounter with a distressed patient in whatever profession you are, you'll have that encounter and you'll leave it either feeling that you've done a good job or not so good job. And ideally, if we want to learn, then we go away and reflect on that experience, and that's where good tutors and good student support comes in. It's absolutely where ePreP comes in, because you can go and write down your experience and then have something captured to think about at a later date. you reflect on what you might have done differently or done better. You might conceptualize in the sense of thinking about what it was and why it didn't go so well or it did go well, and go maybe look at the textbooks or look at some other videos and learning materials. And then you go and see another distressed patient and hopefully do things a bit better, and you go round the loop. So that's pretty common sense, but we often forget that, or we don't have the ability to have that reflection or the support or to conceptualize, because you need good support. So certainly when I was learning to take bloods as a medical student, I just did loads of bloods. Nobody ever stopped and said, well, why are all your patients bruised or whatever? You know, there was no reflection, there was no conceptualization, because you were too busy just doing. And you need all the elements in the circle to make it work. You also need emotional involvement in what you're doing and to think about things and really make that work. So I'm just going to ask you to have a break again, including those of you who are watching remotely. So talk to your neighbour this time about a specific event in your clinical training and what was memorable about it. Is there anything in your clinical training that made things work? Some of the stuff will be the same, obviously, but just think about clinical training, what made a good placement work or a good encounter. Just have another couple of minutes. Okay, let me stop you again. So just a couple of examples. We had general stuff before about learning about support and people you're with. Any specific things that made clinical learning memorable? Let's ask the students particularly. What have you come across so far that's been a specific thing that's made a clinical learning event memorable? Okay. Autonomy to make your own mistakes. And what did you say the second bit? Learning afterwards. So, okay, which probably needs support and guidance and etc. All right. Anything else? Seeing
as belief, so if you see a series of clinical signs, then it's more as opposed to people like that.
Yeah, so you can do all sorts of stuff in books, but when you actually see something, and it's a direct experience, that's because of that emotional attachment again, because whatever you see is attached to a real person, and it does give impact to it, doesn't it? Any other last thing?
Realising you have a different approach with different patients, and that's something you only experience from meeting different people.
Yeah, so realizing you need a different approach with different patients. If you read textbooks, then people who have heart attacks have crushing central chest pain and maybe into the jaw, and they're a bit sweaty and clammy. that's actually not how patients present. You know, maybe once in a career they do, but usually they just feel a bit rubbish on the golf course, or have some palpitations, or look a funny colour and someone doesn't like the look of them. And you learn by realising everyone's a bit different and things present in different ways, and by making sense of those differences. And again, you need the space on placements, and you need the good tutors to bring that home to you. I was at Edinburgh doing my training a long time ago, and for my memorable experience, because I was thinking about this, was actually one of the things we used to do, going back a while, is when the junior doctors were on leave, you used to cover for them and do locums, even as fourth and fifth year medical students. And gosh, that responsibility allied with the good support and everything really made you learn, because you knew you were carrying the can and taking responsibility. You were absolutely part of the team because you had to be part of the team. And those things are really important to focus the mind. So you need a little bit of tension and a bit of pressure, as well as the patients available to learn from. Reflective learning. People hate reflection sometimes when you're students. It all sounds a bit nebulous and tedious. Donald Shern talks about reflection on action. So it's about doing something, seeing something, and being supported to have a critical discussion with colleagues or a self-reflection with yourself about what you might have done differently or better. And then you move on as you get more experience to reflection in practice, so that it becomes a more intuitive thing. But the e-portfolios and ePreP are crucial at this, because if you can capture learning experiences and share those with colleagues or share them with tutors and start to reflect, you start to become a better clinician. And it's not something that stops when you graduate, it's something that carries on. So still in our practice every week we have significant learning events where basically we're reflecting on what went pretty well and what maybe didn't go so well, and whether we could have got that chat with cancer in 2 weeks earlier and things. So it doesn't stop, and it's crucial as part of your learning. And significant learning, supported participation is basically, to do that you need the support of good tutors and colleagues. Significant learning is learning which really changes your mindset and stays with you, because it challenges your belief system, I guess. I saw someone in Bridlington's about 40,000 patients, the town I work in, and 1,500 of those are in residential or nursing homes. A lot of people go to Brid because it's nice and flat, and they used to go on holiday there, and then they sort of grow old there. And so we have a higher than average population in care and nursing homes. And I went to visit a chap who was in his 90s the other day, who we felt had a chest infection, and he was sitting there in a big row of lots of other slumped people in a big row. They're a bit depressing sometimes, residential homes. And it was almost could have been a veterinary experience, in the sense I could have done his temperature, listened to his chest, given him his antibiotics, and been out in 2 minutes. And he had dementia. There was superficially not much going on there. But I had a really inspirational teacher when I was on placement as a student, who said you always should finish any clinical encounter by knowing a little bit more about the person the encounter's with than you started it. And it's always stuck with me, and I think it's very important. So I asked this chap what he did in the war, because he was of an age where he would have done something in the war, the Second War. And he started talking about D-Day and being the first chap into northern France in tanks. One of the amazing things about dementia is you lose the last 5, 10, 20 years, but what you did as a child or as a young adult in his case, especially when hugely stressful times, it sticks with you. And suddenly everyone was enthralled by this guy who came alive. So he's still got the same antibiotics, and still, hopefully his chest infection got better as a result. But actually I'd had an encounter with a real patient, and that for me was based on something that significant happened in my learning 20 years previously. Last bit of theory, social learning. All the previous stuff I talked about suggests we learn from individuals and as individuals, and actually we don't. We're social beings, and we learn in teams and in groups and from each other just as much as anything. Lev Vygotsky, who was a Russian psychologist, said that we learn through interaction, dialogue, making sense of things through supporting others to learn and helping people realize their potential. And there's a whole body of work about communities of practice from Lev and Wenger about if you're in a group of people, whether you're a group of pharmacy students, nursing students, I don't know, beekeeping in my most recent learning experiences, you learn from being that body of people who's trying to achieve something together and arguing about things that are important or what's not important, people joining the group, bring new ideas, you see different cases and you discuss it. And all that slightly informal interaction, but something that faculty and tutors can support, actually is what makes you learn. So not many people are very good at learning by themselves. We all learn formally and informally in groups. And the reason that's important is because you need to recognize the groups of people you're learning with are really valuable and important to you, and you don't want to get stuck in non-productive cliques of learners. But equally, as faculty and as tutors, we have to encourage that social learning and give the space for it to occur. I'm not going to say much about learning culture and environments and things, except to say where hospitals or institutions or general practice don't have a culture of learning and supporting people to think and challenge, including students, then mistakes happen. So in England, there was a big heart scandal in Bristol 10 years ago because there was no culture. Nobody felt they could criticize or question why there were so many pediatric deaths. So they kept happening. In mid-Staffordshire recently, there was a big scandal in England, and again, the inquiry found everyone had stopped questioning what they were doing, whether it was good or bad. So we have to learn in environments which help value our contribution. Right. Too much theory. You guys in Cork or Tralee or Dublin, how can you, as students, get the most out of your placements? And how can you best prepare for placements? How are we doing for time? We're not doing badly. Just have a quick chat for the students about... Sorry, I'll go back one. What you do to prepare. So the best placement you've had, what did you do to prepare for it that made it good? And as tutors, what would you like to see your students doing to prepare for placements? Just have another minute and a half chatting to your colleagues about how to get the best out of your placements. Okay. Okay, I'm going to stop you there. I'm not going to ask you to shout out this time. I just wanted you to just have that moment to reflect and think about what... partly to acknowledge you can make a difference as students as to how much you get out of your placements. So my top tips, which are from experience as much as research, because there isn't much research in this, would be that you need to read enough or inquire enough to know where your placement fits in with your overall curriculum. what are the learning objectives for the placement? It's easy to turn up on a Monday and actually not have thought about that, but you ought to know why you're going on that placement and what you're meant to be getting out of it. And if you don't know, you should be a bit bolshy with your institution and say, actually, I need to know what I'm meant to be getting out of this placement. And if you've been sent stuff ahead of the placement to prepare, you need to prepare, because otherwise you will get less out of the placement. You also need to reflect ahead of the placement about where you are in your learning and be honest with yourself about where your weaknesses are and what you might want to work on. And that's partly you're professionals, so you need to think about specifics. What have I done badly in exams before? What do my colleagues say I'm weak at? What do my tutors say I'm weak at? And the tutors will love it. If you turn up on your placement and say, actually, I don't think I'm very good at looking in eyes, or whatever it is, or and ask your tutor, that makes their life easier. So they will love it if you go and you've got specifics you want to learn. And the third thing is you need to take responsibility. Some placements are bad, not because the hospital's not very good or it's too busy, or because the pharmacy you go to is not very good. It's because you don't engage enough. So you also have a responsibility to make placements work and to give good feedback to the people running the placements. And in terms of tutors and what they can do, and obviously it's relevant to you as students in terms of the feedback as well. How do we make placements work? So there was some good work in Holland from Tim Dorn and colleagues that looked at Dutch medical students. And he said that learning occurs best this is hospital environments, through supported participation in clinical activities. It goes back to the theory, and one of his colleagues, PhD students called Clarke de Boer, did the same, and she found that students only really learned if they were part of the team, if they were supported to take responsibility, and really engaged with the learning. And she developed a concept of expansive and restrictive learning placements, and you will recognize these if you reflect on your own experiences. But the expansive ones are the ones where you were expected when you arrived on the Monday morning, your picture was up, you were welcomed, you were made a cup of tea, and then actually you, Siobhan, you're coming off with the doctor now to go and do the bloods. You know, you were straight in there, immersed in the team, and actually you felt really important at the end of the day because you were part of helping that patient care as well as learning. And you can't learn without that engagement. And there's some good research that backs that up. There's some work, so I'll come back one sec. There's some work from Ireland on postgraduate training from Mulroney from about 10 years ago. And he looked at 3 positive characteristics of the clinical learning environment. So one was being part of a team, especially if it was a happy, positive team that actually inspired you a bit. One was having a very supportive, organised and knowledgeable personal tutor or trainer. So it is a lot easier if you know that someone's looking out for you and someone's supporting you along the journey when you're on your placement. And that's something as faculty we can change. And then the third thing is having a very well-organised educational environment. So if you get your timetable and it's really clear and stuff's not being cancelled, you start to respect it and you take everything a bit more seriously. So again, that's stuff we as tutors and as faculty can do. A slight tangent to vertical integration of learning and teaching, partly because Andrew's here who's done some work on this as well from Limerick. But there's some really nice work in Australia, which is a bit depressing for the likes of Henry and myself, who are longer in the tooth. Because actually what we tend to learn from colleagues who are one step ahead of us on the learning rung. So if you're a junior student in a placement and the senior students, you will learn from the senior students. The senior students will learn from the junior doctors or the junior pharmacists, etc. And actually having a mixture of learners of different stages encouraged to learn from each other makes for really powerful learning. I did a thesis on a teaching practice in Bradford, which was about 11,000 patients and a whole host of different learners there, and looked at them in great depth over the course of a year, and it was fascinating. And what I ended up with was a model of engagement and opportunity in clinical learning. And the engagement part was recognition, respect, relevance, emotion. And I won't go into it in great depth, but if students and learners clearly felt valued and recognized, and they were able to ask questions and everyone knew they were there to learn. That was important. The respect came from how well organised that placement was and how much it was clear that the practice respected the fact they were there to learn. Having good support all the time. Relevance was about pitching it at the right level. If your tutor knows where you are on your learning journey and gives you that next bit of challenge, then that makes it relevant and you learn more. And the emotion was the sort of unexpected, the tutors going the extra mile or being directly exposed to patients who were in the middle of their clinical events and things. The clinical side, the opportunity side of the model was having patients to tell their stories. That might be self-evident, but doesn't always happen on placements because sometimes you end up not actually seeing the patients coming in because they're too ill or they're too busy. And having that range of learners around so you can interact with peers. And there's been some very good work in the UK about quality criteria for placements, having the physical environment right, having those named contacts, enthusiastic tutors, and patients who are prepared. And I'm going to say just a little bit about active involvement of patients because I think it gets neglected. The General Medical Council in the UK recognises that we have to have patients actively involved both in curriculum planning, in teachment and in assessment. And there's a whole host of stuff from North America about called the taxonomy of patient involvement from Angela Trowell and Bill Godolphin and colleagues that talked a lot about expert patients. And I'm not sure if Cork uses them, but what I just want to make a plea for, though, is for a stronger informal voice. So when we have patients involved in our teaching, we try and reward them and involve them in the consultation. And one of the things I do personally is, at the end of a teaching encounter, I will say, just before you go, Mrs. Jones, thanks very much for being involved. Could you just let James or whoever it is know what can he do to be a better doctor in the future or a better pharmacist? And actually, if you actively involve the patients, it both respects their involvement, but you get some fantastic feedback that you'd never be able to do, because they don't say he ought to listen to the heart better. They'll say, well, he ought to take his hands out of his pockets when he's talking to me, or he ought to stop mumbling. And it's stuff that actually we can't often say as tutors. So it is surprising and powerful. So how is all this relevant to you? So our ambition as pharmacists or nurses or doctors should be this slide, really. It should be helping our patients to celebrate their 100th birthday in style and quite possibly with a fag or an e-cig. So last little gap, but just, I don't want you can chat to your neighbour if you want, just to have a quick think from what I've said very briefly today and from what you know is coming. What are you going to do differently next week on placement or the rest of this year on placement to make your placements better, either as a student or as a tutor? Just jot a couple of notes down or have a quick think or chat to your neighbour if you want. We'll just do it for 1 minute. So I'm going to stop you there because I don't want to be buzzed and run out of time in this talk, but I guess I'm trying to model in a way the fact you need these moments to reflect and think about your own thing and put some of the learning into action. I hope you're going to prepare for your placements. I hope you're going to engage with your tutors or your students if you are the tutors. I hope you're going to challenge if you're the tutors, because we can't learn if people aren't challenging. I hope you're going to be prepared to be challenged and not take it personally if you're the students, because you're not going to learn unless someone's a bit tough on you. I hope you're going to reflect. I hope you're going to be adaptable in your learning, because sometimes you will have to change your mind about things. And I hope, and it reflects something John said, you hope you relax. So John Lennon said, life is what happens to you when you're busy making other plans, and I think that's very wise. Just 3 challenges I want to leave you with. One is money. We live in a cash-poor environment, both as universities and in the health sector. And medical education, pharmacy education, nurse education gets squeezed between the lack of cash in education and in the clinical sector. And that's why it's wonderful that the forum's here and supporting this and actually helping ease that a bit. But we somehow have to find more funding to support good learning, otherwise we won't have good clinicians in the future, and our patients have to be our allies in that fight. The second thing is place, and this is we need more clinicians in community settings and out of hospital, and I'm shamelessly passionate about that. Too much of education, both in the UK, Ireland, and other countries, is hospital-based, and you can't have a good health service unless we have very high-quality people, pharmacists and nurses and everyone working in the community, because that stops people going into hospital in the first place. And the third thing, I'm very aware, I haven't talked much about technology, which is a bit ironic, seeing as we're talking about ePreP today. There are great challenges to learning with technology, and it can detract from learning with patients if we're not careful. Where ePreP comes in is it should link the two. It gives you a technological tool to capture learning and to help reflect on it. But equally, you need to be taught about information governance, about the hazards of social media and learning, and the boundaries, and I'm sure your institutions do that. My dad died a couple of years ago, and he died at home of cancer, and he had a medical student went out to him with his GP, who was wonderful, in the last week, and the medical student sat on the settee in our house and was busy texting on his mobile and taking no active involvement at all as the GP and Dad discussed, how he was going to die, which actually did about 4 days later. And Dad lost his rag and had a good rant to this guy about the privilege it is to be a medical student, and the same applies to nursing students, pharmacy students, and the privilege it is to be there at very intimate moments of people's lives. So please make the most out of your placements, because they're very important, and as tutors, please make sure those placements are very special. Thank you very much, and good luck in your studies.